And so intergenerational trauma is unhealed, unprocessed, unresolved trauma that festers in our bodies, and it can be transferred to our offspring. And you may want to know how. How can it be transferred through our offspring? And it's normally through personal experiences, social experiences, environment, and through the DNA. And so as I navigate and study these intergenerational trauma effects and how they impact the overall health and wellness of Black women, I focus more specifically on the soul wounding effects of historical trauma. And so what do I mean by soul wounding? So the study of soul trauma and how it shows up in our bodies, how it shows up is linked, directly linked to the historic and chronic dehumanization and subjugation of our bodies, a disconnection from our ancestors, and a demonization of our indigenous spiritualities and spiritual practices. And so when we're thinking about historical or any type of trauma, again, with it living and breathing in the body, it requires an embodied, spiritualized way of healing and being in relationship with ourselves and others. And so that's pretty much the crux of my work in terms of what I center my work on. Some of you in this space I know personally, some I may not know. This is a master class for everyone's consumption. So I'll just take a moment to share with you my story in terms of how I got here and in terms of why I am so passionate about this work. And so I think it's very important that whenever we come into spaces, communal spaces, family spaces, that we name ourselves. And so who am I? I am Kimberly, daughter of Elaine, granddaughter of Thelma, granddaughter of Lucy, great-granddaughter of Wamazetta. And my background stems from being a corporate executive for over 30 years. So I spent 30 years in corporate America. And during that time period, I worked for a lot of the large, well-known major companies. I worked for Accenture, I worked for IBM, US Bank, et cetera. So being a Black woman in these all white spaces, and I'm gonna say this, being Black was one thing, being a woman was another thing. Being a Black woman in these spaces was challenging in the aspect where I would always have to prove my worthiness to be in these spaces, no matter how smart, no matter how intelligent, no matter how much I knew, it was always a feeling of proving myself, not only a feeling, but a task of proving myself and proving me worthy to be a leader. And all that's fine. All of that is part of the course. A lot of you have been in these corporate spaces or white environments and work environments where, you know, this is part for the course. However, my life shifted when I became a mother. Because in becoming a mother and being in these spaces, I was no longer interested or had the mental, physical, and emotional capacity to continue to prove my worthiness, to continue to put in the 40 hours, the 50 hours, the 60-hour work weeks, to continue to travel 5 days a week. You know, all of that energy I wanted and needed to expend on my son, and I didn't have it. And so I went through this period of when I became a mother, of corporate doubling down, you know, wanting more, demanding more than what I was able to give. And then it's a double-edged sword because now you appear to be not cooperative, not a team player, A lot of times I would ask, because I had a newborn, like, hey, and in corporate, everybody has these team outings and team functions and after work. So you work 10 hours and now they want to go drink. And I'm like, not interested in it, trying to get home to my son. Oh, well, the client wants you to come and the client needs this. And now I'm being getting demerits for not wanting to do all of the extracurriculars. And so it was really, 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 really challenging. But I stuck in it for another 14 years. And after that, even after I had my oldest Christian, then I had another. So now I had two. So now, combined with all of the demands of corporate, the demands of being a single mother, because I was a full-time single mother, and then being and all of the demands of my sons and their extracurriculars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I lost myself. And if there are mothers in this space, I know that you can relate to completely losing yourself. In corporate, I wasn't good enough. And dealing with incessant micro and macro aggressions. At home, I wasn't good enough because I was spending so much time in corporate and I felt not enough time at home. And then being at home, always on the move, always on the go, always putting out, always giving and giving and giving until I couldn't give anymore. And so what does that look like for Black women in particular? It looks like anxiety. It looks like depression. It looks like stress. And all of those things begin to manifest in the body. Remember, I said that trauma was embodied. So all of these things begin to manifest in the body. And now you're dealing with heart palpitations, heart issues. You're dealing with backaches. You're dealing with, for some people, diabetes, some people, high blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera. And so I reached a point in my life, and this was probably around the age of 40, where I said, enough is enough. And so in order to save myself and to heal my life, I began to explore spirituality and spiritual methods of healing that went beyond the confines of organized religion. And I think that's important to note. Again, because as Black women, we have a very intimate relationship with the Black church, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in those spaces, are we healing? Are we evolving? Are we dealing with the traumas, our everyday experiences, or is that a place we go to kind of bypass it, to feel good, to forget about it? And so I needed tools to integrate into my everyday life to be able to manage stress, to be able, because my external life wasn't going to change. I was a mother and that was that. And I had two growing boys. That was that. They had to eat. That was that. You had to go to work. That was that. So I get it. It's not about bypassing all of that. It's about, how can I be in these spaces and be resourced myself and find joy within myself and find spaciousness and know that I deserve that kind of energy for myself. And so then I began to learn, I began to research, I began to study, I began to travel to places like Sedona, Bali, etc., where I learned about energy work and meditation and healing stones and consciousness and spiritual tools of healing. And all of these things it was so overwhelming, but it worked. When I started integrating these things into my life, it worked. And not only did it work, I became excited, thrilled to be sharing it with others. However, that was reached with a lot of fear, a lot of disdain, a lot of, what are you doing and why are you doing that? And is that hoodoo and is it voodoo and it's, all of the things that us Black folks, when we're in this fear-based mentality that we begin to name around the shame and what's indigenous to us, because we don't know it, And so in 2014, through my spiritual practices, I found the energy, the courage, the wherewithal to walk away from my corporate career, because I had found a passion, I had found my calling, and that was to teach people and to work with people to open up to indigenous spiritual practices and spiritualities that help heal our minds, body, and spirit. Because what I found, and even so, I left corporate in 2014, I opened a wellness center. And even in that space, I found myself again immersed and entrenched and whiteness and white healing practitioners and going to white retreats and white comments. So the whole metaphysical space, if any of you have delved into the metaphysical space, you'll find that that's all white as well. And so we don't feel safe in these spaces. And so again, we're shunning that which if we don't know. And so being in these spaces, something said, okay, something has got to give. Black folk are the most spiritual, spirit-filled people, I believe, on the planet, right? So how is it that we are not practicing spirituality as a tool, a means, a method of healing our minds, bodies, and spirits? Why aren't we consciously integrating it? Why do we fear it? And so I had all of these questions, which led me into a PhD program. It led me to do the research, to do the scholarship, to figure out what it was that where the disconnect was. And when I found that disconnect, I found it in our traumas. It is in the things that we have been through, the experiences that we have been through, the colonization, the slavery, the mind fuck, so to speak, that we have been through, societal mind fuck that we have been through, that has taught us to demonize that which is of us. And so when we talk about spirituality and indigenous spiritual practices, these are spiritualities and practices that are embodied within you, that are gifted within you from your ancestors, that are a part of nature, of the natural world. And so once I began to learn this and integrate it, then that became this interesting intersection that I write about, that I research about. It intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, embodied spiritualities, and how Black women navigate these spaces and are able to use spiritual embodied tools to heal their mind, bodies, and spirit. And so today I call myself a corporate or a white supremacist patriarchy survivor. I intentionally live my life on the margins. I'm not in those spaces that cause harm no longer. I'm a spiritualist, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a scholar teacher, I'm an activist. I did finish my doctoral studies. I have a PhD now in philosophy and religion. And through my own healing journey, I have become keenly aware of how the results and the effects of historical and intergenerational trauma, how these things pass down through my lineage, how these things have affected me, how it has affected my sons, and how we can heal these things in community, which led me to create and develop a healing model called soul to soul healing as both theory and practice. Okay. So I will take a pause there because I said a lot. And before I move forward, I tend to do this in all of my talks, and I don't want to stop here because I think it's very important that we name those teachers, healers, practitioners that had a direct influence on our work, or my work. I'm speaking for myself, that had a direct influence on my work. And so I do want to take a moment to honor them by saying their names: Phyllis Wheatley, Alice Walker, Dr. Maya Angelou, Dr. Angela Davis, Dr. Patricia Hill Collins, Dr. Cynthia B. Dillard, Dr. Venus Evan Winters, Dr. Annette Williams, Dr. M. Sean Copeland, Juris Doctorate Kimberly Crenshaw, and Dorothy Roberts. And that's just to name a few. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot to cover in a short amount of time, and I really want to get through a lot of the material and be able to introduce you to more intimately to my Soul to Soul healing program. And so we're going to begin by doing just a brief grounding, and it will allow us to center and open our hearts so we can hear primarily with our hearts. And then we're going to talk more concretely about historical and intergenerational trauma and the effects that it has on Black women. And then I'm going to introduce to you or talk to you more about my Soul to Soul healing program and upcoming course. And so, if you would like to join me in a brief grounding, I invite you to close your eyes. Just allow your body to settle. And just take a moment to draw your awareness to your breath. Following the ebb and flow. And then find your heart, noticing it without judgment. And then drop down into your legs, into your feet, perhaps wiggling your toes. And taking a deep breath in from the belly, hold it in the heart, and then softly exhaling it out. Another deep breath in from the belly. Hold it in your heart, and then softly exhaling it out. And one more deep breath in from the belly. And as you are setting your intentions, I will set some intentions for the collective. To open our hearts, to receive life force energy into our hearts, to fill our hearts, to listen to our hearts, to trust our hearts, to hear the wisdom of our hearts, to speak from our heart, to lead from our hearts, to heal our hearts, to honor our hearts as a sacred center of intelligence, divine wisdom, harmony, truth, and balance. And so it is. And so I am going to share my screen. Giving you a moment to slowly come back into the space. And hopefully you can see my screen. Can someone thumbs up if you can see my screen? It says historical and intergenerational. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And so just a quick show of hands, and you can use the Zoom or you can raise your hand. How many of you are familiar with the terms historical trauma? Okay. What about the term intergenerational trauma? A little bit, a little bit. Yeah, yeah. Awesome. And so I'll share with you kind of the textbook definitions because I think it's so important um, that I contextualize what I mean by some of these terms that I'm going to be using a lot in this presentation. And so when we talk about historical trauma is cumulative, unresolved trauma that is produced by sanctioned dehumanization, torture, rape, subjugation, oppression, and assassination of entire groups of people who share a collective identity, either ethnic, national, racial, religious, and or sexual. Okay? It is the violent, collective acts of war, colonialism, genocide, and slavery which conspire to produce a legacy of traumatic events experienced by historically oppressed communities over succeeding generations. And these events and these experiences, they include social, physical, and psychological responses. It's not a this happened, hundreds of years ago, get over it. The body is holding and transmitting it from generation to generation to generation in many cases. And then what you see as these patterns, they become behaviors, they become culture. And so it is understanding the origin stories of a lot of the trauma, not just, oh, that happened. And so when you think about something as heinous as having your child snatched out of your arms, when you think about something as heinous as having to nurse someone else's child, but yours is out there lost in the world, that's just something that does not get resolved in one generation. That's not something you just get over. The behaviors in terms of having to protect your children, having to keep them close. And then we're just talking about what happened during slavery. We're not talking about, so then you get into Jim Crow era, then you get into segregation, then you get about, so this is generation, then you get to current today where you still fear for the safety of your children. You still fear having someone take your children away from you, either through street violence or police violence. So all of these things continue to perpetrate itself. And so how do you heal? How are you able to finally settle your body with all of these things continuing to happen? And so that's historical trauma, or the roots of historical trauma. So now shifting a little bit into intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma is the unconscious, you're not consciously doing this, but it's the unconscious transmission of parents' post-traumatic effects of trauma to their offspring. And so children unknowingly, it's not that you're intentionally doing it, but children unknowingly live out their parents' trauma retentions. They play them out in their own lives. And this happens through nonverbal, non-conscious mechanisms like psychic memory, like epigenetics, behavioral modeling, and energy transmission. And again, this is without the child ever having direct experience or exposure to the actual traumatic event. So we are children of our ancestors who were enslaved, and we are still experiencing the effects of that abuse, of the treatment. And I'll give you a more concrete example. So I think about my oldest son in terms of he has a really deep-seated fear of money, of not having enough, of having to struggle, having to hustle, having to get paid, and he real tight with I can't spend my because I don't know where my next meal is coming from. Like these are conversations he's had with me, right? And so I look at him and I'll be like, and it's really interesting. I don't judge. And he didn't grow up in an environment of struggle and scarcity. He didn't, he had a middle class childhood. He really didn't want for anything. We weren't rich, but he had plenty of food and clothes, and we traveled and he did extracurricular activities, and it's what I would consider to be a pretty stable um childhood. However, as he is now a young adult, these fears are sometimes crippling for him. And so that's an example of intergenerational trauma. There is something within him that he is not settled when it comes to money and to survival. And so I want to share with you a really quick reel on Instagram that I saw, and
They have a bunch of
hopefully,
rats in a cage and they left the gate open.
you know
And every
what,
time the rats would try to leave, they get shocked. They try to leave, they get shocked.
I'm gonna
They try to
have
leave, they
to,
get
I'm sure you
shocked.
can't hear the
Eventually, the
sound. I
rats
need to
get
share my
tired. Fast
sound.
forward, those rats have little baby rats. They put the baby rats in a separate cage
One
and left the
second.
gate open. And they never tried to leave. They'd never been shocked. They'd never experienced that same trauma, yet they still acted in that same way. And that's how we understand epigenetics. Trauma and response patterns can be passed down to us. This isn't just through generations, it could be through lifetimes. Also something that may have happened in our childhood. What
Can you all hear it
situation
or
in our
no?
lives are we still keeping
Oh,
ourselves
you
in
can hear
when
it?
the gate is
Oh,
wide
okay.
open? If it is your birthright to live the most expansive, joy-filled, love, and engaging life ever, where are you staying stuck where the gate is wide open? And where do we find and expand our perception to the possibilities that are outside this gate? There was a study where they had a bunch of rats in a cage and they left the gate open. And every time the rats would try to leave, they get shocked. They try to leave, they get shocked. They try to leave, they get shocked.
Okay. So you all were able to hear that video? Awesome. And so I think that she did an incredible job of summing that up in a clip. And so when we think about it more from a clinical or psychological perspective, there are emerging studies right now in the field of epigenetics that really is looking at historical and intergenerational trauma. And researchers are now starting to understand that there is a cumulative compounding nature of trauma and how it gets transmitted from one generation to the next. And some traumas, again, are so devastatingly painful that the wounding metastasizes within the body and again can be transmitted to subsequent generations. And I call this kind of this soul wounding effect. And so the next term, healing. So I think it's important to define healing within the context of how I talk about it with my clients and also through research, because a lot of times when we hear the word healing, we think that you're fixing something. We think that something is cured. And that's not what healing means in the context of historical and intergenerational trauma, because it stems, for one, it's still ongoing, right? So how can you completely heal from something that's still occurring? But not only that, the only cure that we could ever have is to stop it completely, stop the systemic abuses on Black bodies. So that would be the only real cure, is to eradicate all of these systems of oppression. So when I talk about healing, because that ain't it. So when I talk about healing, really what I'm speaking of is natural and supernatural processes of recovery, repair, renewal, and transformation. And so these are accessible for us, so we can improve the quality of our lives, so we can stop the transmission of these silent trauma effects. And so healing, it may or may not involve curing specific ailments, but it does involve us transmitting and transferring intergenerational healing instead of intergenerational trauma. And so let's talk a little bit about historical trauma in Black women. So, as the quote that I said alluded to, the historical abuses on our minds, bodies, and spirits, we have generationally endured persistent sexual, racial, political, and economic oppressions that originate from, again, legacies of colonialism and slavery. And so the egregious, profitable, systemic abuse of Black women's bodies, characterized again by exploitation and commodification, this is the breeding ground for historical and intergenerational trauma. And I think it's very important to name Black women's experiences uniquely, because conversations, think tanks, research, a lot of work has been done around how racialized trauma affects Black men, but not enough research and studies done around specifically how it affects Black women. And so again, when we talking about historical trauma, it didn't happen. It's not that it happened in the past and we got over it, it was so many years ago and we got over it. Again, because it lives and breathes in our bodies, we tend to begin to create these defense mechanisms to protect ourselves from the onslaught of trauma. And what are some of those defense mechanisms? Overprotecting mothering. We carry these negative tropes about being this strong, angry Black woman, because we have to protect ourselves. And so we don't think that we are being, have this constricting energy. But again, if nobody is protecting us, then yeah, we got to man up, so to speak. We have these outer tough exteriors when really, we just want to be supported and loved and nurtured. And so these things begin, although we sometimes don't recognize it as trauma effects, it is, and it's stemming, it has an origin. And so a lot of times the historical trauma effects, it leaves us feeling dispirited, disconnected, and dismembered from our bodies, because our bodies begin to house all of the pain and physical ailments that result from us being overextended, overconsumed. And so our bodies begin to shut down, so to speak. And so if we are disconnected from our bodies, we can't feel what is in alignment for us. We can't feel our nose. We can't feel freedom. We can't feel liberation. And in order to have those experiences, we have to be, our bodies have to be in a state of receiving it. And so in my research and in my work as a spiritualist, as a life coach of working with Black women and women of color on a regular basis, what I have found was there are some common, what's called historical trauma responses that, again, individuals and communities that have been exposed to these historical trauma events tend to, behaviors, features that they tend to exhibit throughout their lives. And so historical trauma response is actually a term that a scholar, researcher, author, her name is Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart, who is a Native American research scholar, activist, that she coined this term as she was studying the historic trauma effects in Native American and indigenous populations. And it is rooted in what's called historical trauma theory, which examines the link between historical trauma retentions, disease, and public health disparities. And so this is really their theories and studies again out here that speak to this, but not specifically to Black women. They talk about uh, uh, Indigenous or Native American communities. They talk about Black folk as a whole. Some studies, still not a lot. Some talk about the famine. Some talk about a lot about the Holocaust. And so all of these are events that are deemed worthy enough to really do deep dives into historical trauma theories. But, you know, Black women are, y'all already know. And so that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this work too, to get this information and to get the research out there. And so I using Maria Yellow Braveheart's work, I also started to identify what's called historical trauma responses. These are responses that Black women tend to, as a collective, deal with and respond to historically traumatizing events within their life. And so some of the ones that really stand out: chronic anxiety. We suffer from PTSD symptoms, lacking of self-care, being complicit in the hypersexualization of our bodies, emotional health issues, Black Superwoman syndrome, which I'll talk about shortly, body shaming. And so these are some of the, again, common historical trauma responses. And these are common. Not every single Black woman experiences all of these or some of these, but, you know, as a collective, these are some that came to the top. And so what I did as part of my research and in an effort to kind of substantiate those historical trauma responses, to quantify them and to see exactly how many Black women on average have these experiences or share these experiences, I created what's called the Black Woman's Historical Trauma Assessment. And I'll share it with you at the end if you're interested in taking it, just to see how historical trauma events are still showing up in your life and how you're responding to historical trauma. And so 63 Black women took this assessment when I was doing my research. And what I found was that the number one historical trauma response for Black women: exhaustion and fatigue. 100%, every single person who took that assessment, named exhaustion and fatigue. The second one, Black Superwoman syndrome. The third one, internalized self-hatred and insecurities. The fourth one, chronic anxiety. And these are really high percentages, mind you. Chronic anxiety, 90%. And that really surprised me. Again, I say that every time I talk about this, because chronic anxiety was something that I thought I dealt with because of, you know, all the ripping and running and blah, 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 blah. I don't deal with it as much anymore now that I'm not in the corporate space, but to understand and to know that 90% of the people Black women who did the assessment are suffering from chronic anxiety, I felt that was really interesting. And unprocessed, unresolved grief, which makes sense, because if you're exhausted and you're fatigued, you don't have time to process your grief. You're always moving and going. So yeah, you would have chronic anxiety. And so these percentages are very high, as well as the Black Superwoman syndrome. So show of hands if anybody is familiar with Black Superwoman syndrome. Good, 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 good. And so if you're not, the Black Superwoman syndrome, this defines Black women's experiences of taking on multiple roles: mother, nurturer, breadwinner, on and on and on, out of economic and social necessity. And so the impetus for Black woman syndrome is this ideology of inherent survivalism, being strong, being resilient. However, this often, and it becomes our identities, right? You know, our identities become rooted in how much we can take on and how much we can care for everybody and how many balls we can juggle at once. And so, but this syndrome, it leads to dehumanization, where now we're expected to be superhumans and we're not allowed the space to rest, to grieve, to feel, to create boundaries or care for our physical and mental state of being. Very interestingly, I just saw like this clip of all of these people, and they were all men, white and black men, who were denigrating Simone Biles when she decided not to continue on in the Olympics. And I think it was in 2020 because of her mental health issues, because she said it wasn't safe, because if she kept doing it, she could really injure herself or perhaps kill herself. And they said, oh, that's not a strong athlete. That's not. So it's like these expectations that if you're not strong, it's something that you're a quitter and you can't handle it. And and so being strong and resilient becomes our identity. And at the same time, it dehumanizes us. Okay. And so due to these subtle yet compounding effects of historical, intergenerational, and personal, I'm not even talking about the personal traumas that we deal with on a day-to-day basis within our own family structures, within our own partnerships and relationships. But due to all of these compounding effects of trauma, it's often very difficult for clinicians to diagnose and determine the fact that we are suffering from trauma and when an intervention is needed. And that's the problem. You'll go to the doctor and you got back issues. You'll go to the doctor with, I'm tired, I can't sleep, I'm exhausted, exhaustion number one. And they looking at you like, well, I'll write you a prescription, but you got to keep going to work, take your ass to work, that kind of thing. You still got to go to work, even if you don't, you still got to deal with the kids, you still. And so trauma in Black women, it very well may look like strength and resilience. And so it goes undetected, it goes unnoticed. And so again, if you're interested in taking the assessment at the end, I have a link for you. Gosh, I'm almost at time. And so again, throughout my research, I have found that we do suffer extensively from historical and intergenerational trauma. And here's the deal. It affects every aspect of our lives, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. It's affecting every aspect of our lives. Family wounding. And so the effects of it looks like abandonment. A lot of us are coming from abusive households. It looks like a lot of deceit. Black folks are very secretive in they stuff. Well, we don't want you to know it because it may hurt you, or so a lot of family secrets. A lot of people in the study as a whole talked about spiritual wounding, religious wounding, wounding in the Black church, shaming in the Black church, shaming about their sexuality in the Black church, shaming about, any type of weakness. I had a study participant who talked about at one point being suicidal in the church. She was shamed in the church because how dare you? And that's a sin and da 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 da. And then societal wounding, again, the overconsumption of our bodies, it leads to people expecting that they are supposed to consume your body, expecting that you're supposed to work 40, 50-hour weeks and not be tired and not have a problem with it. And, all of the things that I had initially talked about in my own experience. Internalized wounding. And so then we turn these stereotypes, we turn these judgments in on ourselves, and we begin to feel unworthy, and we struggle for joy, and we struggle for purpose. Partner wounding, and not having people who can really support us, again, who are always looking for us to put out, to give out, to be the workhorse in the family, and not having the compassion or the reciprocity returned back to us. A lot of people in this study talked about that again, still the elevation of white women and whiteness over Black women and women of color. And, so all of these things we deal with, and a lot of it begins to manifest itself in our mothering. Because if we can't mother ourselves, if we don't feel safe and secure within ourselves, it's really hard to give to our children. No matter how much we love them, it's hard to give to them what we don't have if we're not resourced. And so the wounded mothering. So you got that aspect. And then you also have the aspect of wounded mothering where we're overprotective, especially of our Black sons, overprotective. Where or we're overcompensating. We're giving our children so much, all the things that we didn't have, we are given to them and overcompensating. And so those are the ways in which this historical and intergenerational trauma begins to infiltrate our everyday lived experiences. And so what do we do? So I've said a lot, I've talked a lot, but where do we go from here? And so I want to note that reclaiming ourselves in our indigenous ways, and when I say indigenous, African, spiritual ways of being in relationship with ourselves is paramount. And so post-colonial indigenous African cultures, they always recognize that there is a spiritual component to all healing. Listen to me, a spiritual component to all healing. Don't pay attention to what the Euro-Westernized world is telling you that, there's a pharmaceutical component to all. No, there's a spiritual component to all healing. And so disease, dis-ease in the body, this is a direct result of energetic imbalances, misalignments, and spiritual disorders. So as a result of the chronic historical and contemporary trauma that Black women experience, I argue that a radical response is needed that intentionally looks to address and heal these interlocking aspects of our lived experiences, without bypassing, without praying it away, without wishing it away. How do we get in here and do the work? And so I created this theory and practice called soul to soul healing. And it's based upon the understanding, again, that healing is dependent upon the embodiment of life force energies, practices, rituals, and connections that reintegrate and restore our spirits. And so spirit restoration, it creates these balanced and harmonious inner and outer environments which are needed to heal. And not only is it needed to heal us, it's needed for us to transmit it to subsequent generations, so they can begin to use tools and resources and spiritualized technologies to mitigate their anxiety, to mitigate their depression, to begin to balance out these energies and these fears of lack and scarcity and being attacked or being abused within a society or culture that continues to attack us. And so I call soul to soul healing a collection of emancipatory, contemplative, and mundane practices. And again, these intentionally create opportunities for healthy generational connections between Black and Indigenous women in their bodies, connection to their families, communities, ancestors, and nature. And so through soul to soul healing, we're able to remember our cultural identities, restore our bodies from being overconsumed, reclaim our indigenous embodied spiritual practices, and continue to resist the force of internalized and externalized oppressions, because it ain't going anywhere, at least not no time soon. So how do we resist? We can't resist if we're energetically depleted. And so this quick illustration kind of, or the model kind of shows how all of these aspects begin to work together to foster and nurture this integral space of healing. And so remembering, when we remember our connections to nature. We remember our bodies. We remember the wisdom of our bodies. We trust the wisdom of our bodies. We understand more about our lineages, our spiritual lineages, as well as our physical lineages. And so this begins with the knowledge of self. Who are you? Who are your people? Where do they come from? Yeah, we have to remember, why did we incarnate in here? What are we doing here? Besides just being somebody's mama or somebody's wife or somebody's workhorse. And so going beyond the physical to really understand who we are, why we are, and what we're connected to. And this is the powerful work of decolonizing our inner psyche and being able to consciously transform these internalized, stereotypical, historical messages about our inability to live creative and fruitful lives, and not just survival. Black folk know how to make money, so I'm not talking about money. Going beyond that. But to get there, we have to restore. We're tired. Y'all saw that number one, exhaustion, fatigue. We can't do nothing until we restore our bodies. So as we remember our bodies, we must also restore our energies, and that vital life force energy that is consistently drained from us every single day through the constant struggle for survival, for visibility, for harmony, for love, for protection, for agency, for compassion. And so restoring our life force energies, that's resting, sleeping. I can tell you now that my clients, I talk about this with my clients all the time, Black women don't get enough sleep. We don't get enough rest. And we can't restore our life force energies without it. It's just impossible. It's not going to happen. And so we have to rest, we have to breathe, we have to sleep, we have to nourish ourselves with the right food. Please be mindful that food is energy, food is life force. And what you put into your body matters. It restores, it'll either restore your energy or deplete your energy. We don't move enough. We don't exercise. We don't dance. And so all of these things are vital to our healing. We will not be able to do any type of intergenerational healing work without restoring the life force of our bodies. Reclaiming our connections back to Mother Earth, reclaiming our indigenous spiritualities, doing the knowledge so we are not bamboozled into demonizing what is true and authentic for us. What is who we are? We are connected to everything. We are connected to nature. So why wouldn't we engage in nature-based spiritualities? Why wouldn't we go and purify ourselves in the water? Why wouldn't we go and sunbathe and get the electromagnetic waves of the sun? Why wouldn't we honor the moon and the energies of the moon that are directly connected to our wounds? Like, why wouldn't we? We have been demonized into believing that, oh, that's not in the Bible, so that's not real. Oh, that's not in this, so you can't do that. Or that's not, Christ wouldn't do that, so you can't do, so it's just like all of this conditioning and all of this colonization, all of these beliefs that have been instilled in us that keeps us separate and disconnected to our own nature, to our own beingness. And so we have to reclaim that. Do the knowledge. The knowledge is out there. Do the research. Engage in these practices so you can see for yourself how they heal and energize your body. And then resisting, continuing to resist. We can't resist if we are not resourced. So resisting the forces of internalized and externalized oppression, the negative stereotypes, the lack of boundaries, the overconsumption of our bodies, the messaging that we have to be in relationships and stay to the end and be submissive and be dutiful and so all of these things we have to resist and demand reciprocity, demand that we be treated in the way that we are giving, that we are able to receive. And so, again, my research has brought me into a place in the space, not just my research, doing 6 years of research and getting this PhD in this area, but also in working with my clients on a regular basis. So not only am I a researcher and a scholar, I'm also a practitioner and a healing practitioner. And so I've seen a lot. I've worked with a lot of healing modalities and worked with a lot of people to understand the root cause of a lot of their blocks. And so based upon that, I created this program. I call it the Soul to Soul Healing Program, which is a curriculum-based educational and experiential learning program. And it offers to people who take it just a wealth of resources, roadmaps, embodied healing experiences for you to develop a healthier relationship with yourself, with your partners, with your children, with your family, and with your community, all aspects of yourself. And it also teaches you how to interrupt and transmute that embodied effects of intergenerational trauma. And so during this program, we're going to go into a deep dive of many of the aspects that I laid out in that chart of all of the woundings that Black, Indigenous, and women of color tend to suffer from as a result of historical and intergenerational trauma. And so we're going to learn embodied practices. We're going to learn rituals. You're going to get information on how to heal your body, how to reclaim your lineages. And so learning more about how these trauma effects present in your own life, observing and learning about your own family patterns of trauma. Again, exploring your identity, your passion, your gifts, being able to extract the medicine of your lineage, because they didn't just, our ancestors didn't just leave us with pain and suffering. They also left us with medicine that we can't seem to get to because we can't rest, And so how do we begin to extract the medicine, the gifts of our lineages? How do we shift wounded mothering into conscious mothering? Learning how to integrate these resources, these tools, these methods into our daily lives to help minimize and interrupt trauma so that we can offer and leave our lineage healed, well, knowing how to find joy and not just being rooted in survival, survival, survival. And so I'm not sure if you all could see the little computer screen with the modules. So I'll just go through them really quick. So this 10-week program, every week there'll be a different module. The first module, conceptualizing historical and intergenerational trauma, and then examining the mother line, examining mother wounds. We got to look at the shit in order to be able to heal it. The same with father line and father wounds. Navigating wounds of religious indoctrination. Locating our bodies in an oppressive society. Where do we stand in this oppressive, and how have we internalized trauma just based upon societal standards? Healing workplace trauma. All of that shit I talked about in the beginning, workplace trauma. Black women in particular, Black, Indigenous, people of color deal with workplace trauma, but we're not talking about it. So how do we heal workplace trauma? How do we examine love and partner relationships from a place of wholeness and not from us always being the ones giving out, putting out, and carrying all the burden and the weight of the whole entire partnership? Talking about conscious mothering, exploring embodied modalities of healing, and finding passion, purpose, and joy. Okay. So here, I just wanted to share too a lot of the healing tools and technologies that I use with my clients on a regular basis during my one-on-one sessions, as well as group, and as well as what we would be going over and through in our Soul to Soul Healing Program, because one size doesn't fit all. And so yoga may be powerful for me, but somebody else may like breath work, and so being able to understand what resonates with your body is also a tool of liberation. A lot of times we're so disconnected from our bodies, we don't know. It's like, I don't know what I need. And so teaching you how to be in tune with your body, and so being able to be conscious and aware of what works and what resonates for you. And so this is just some of the tools and technologies that I use. One of the biggest ones is the embodied soul journey. And so I'm not going to have time to go through one today. But when I do a lot of talks, I did one, an embodied soul journey, for the Association of Black Psychologists. And, those soul journeys are so powerful because they allow you to get the wisdom, the answers, the truth within you, to ask the tough questions. And so if you're interested in doing an embodied soul journey with me, then yes, sign up for this course. And then I tend to do embodied soul journeys in my healing circles. I also facilitate healing circles every first and third Sunday of the month. And so if you want to come to one of the healing circles, you'll have an opportunity to go through an embodied soul journey. And so I'll skip that. We were going to do Who Am I, but we're running out of time. I told y'all I was long-winded. And so in conclusion, so the effects of historical and intergenerational trauma, these are silent but often deadly. Trauma effects left unacknowledged, unhealed, they produce generations of fragmented bodies, hardened emotions, scattered minds, bodies, and spirits. Therefore, it is imperative, mission critical, that Black women learn about historical and intergenerational trauma, observe and acknowledge family patterns of trauma, and be able to integrate tools, resources, methods, practice, and rituals into their daily lives to minimize and interrupt the trauma effects, to begin to break these cycles within their children, within their families, and within their communities. And just some really quick recommendations that even if you don't decide to take the 10-week program with me, these are some stuff that you can do as soon as we get off this call. Do the knowledge of self through researching your lineages. Who are you? Who are your people? Learn to have compassion for your mother's wounds, her mother's wounds, her mother's mother's wounds, and so on. That's part of doing the knowledge. What are her wounds that she has passed on to you? Again, not conscious, not wanting to, but understanding her wounds will allow you to have compassion for her and your own wounds. So research and learn about African spiritualities, culture, and worldviews. Get reacquainted with Mother Earth and nature. Build a garden, go by the water, do some hiking, lay in the grass, watch the sun, moon, the stars. Get connected. Feel your body. Feed your body with life-affirming food. Stop putting low vibration food into your body and expecting you to feel good, expecting you not to be inflamed, expecting you not to feel heavy and dense. Be courageously vulnerable, emotional maturity, lean into your emotions, cry. Learn energy healing practices, meditate, create your own personal rituals, build an ancestor altar, connect to and with your ancestors. They want to help you. They want to support you. They want to educate you. Look in the mirror without judgment. A lot of times we go to the mirror and we instantly go to what's wrong with us. Instantly we go to that one spot in our body that we don't like. Sacralize your body. Say no, creating boundaries with family and friends in particular. It's easy to create boundaries with other folk we don't care about. It's the ones that we love that's the hardest to create boundaries for. Work with healing practitioners like myself and therapists. We're here to help and to hold space for you in this work, but you gotta want to do the work. Sleep, 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 please sleep, breathe, communicate with your inner spirit, with your higher self, find your joy, read, divest from toxic jobs, people, and relationships. Don't be afraid to let go of toxicity. You have to trust that there is something better for you on the other side of it. Let your children play uninhibited, uninterrupted. We teach our children our fear we give directly to our children and wonder why they're fearful. Join a healing community. Healing happens in community. It's too hard to do it on your own. So be in a healing community and continue to resist all forms of oppression, which include partner oppression, spousal oppression, religious oppression, sexual, racial, all of these things. You need energy to do that. You need energy to do that. And so if you don't have energy to do it, then the status quo continues. So those are just some resources, scholars, writings, authors that I work with or pull from. And then the barcodes. So I mentioned, okay, they're still up. So I mentioned that you can do the historical trauma assessment online. I made it where it can calculate how it affects your life, which is really kind of cool, right? And so you can use that barcode, or I can also put the link in the comments. And then if you are interested in learning more about the Soul to Soul Healing Program, you can also follow that barcode, and I'll put a link in the comments, because I am taking wait list. I am starting the wait list, and I believe that the cohort in the class will begin at the beginning of October. And so if you're interested, just please sign up for the wait list, because I'm expecting that I want to have a small, intimate class. And so I'm going to take, the first people who end up signing up on the wait list for the course. So if you're interested now, please do so, and you'll get more information as we get closer to the date. And if you have any thoughts or questions about anything that I haven't covered, please feel free to email me. My email is right there. And now I'll open it up for questions. I know we're a little bit over time, and I appreciate you for hanging around.